I have waited over a half hour for this paint to dry, and it's so humid here where I live that, as you can see here, there are two little pebbles that are still not dry. This area is dry and this area is dry. So usually I just don't put my fingers like that in case it is still damp. But anyway, I took a risk, as I said. Like I said, it looked dryish, but also it's just an exercise. But if you ever do touch your paper and it still feels cold or damp, it needs to dry more. So like I mentioned before, we are just going to go here and with this example that I'm doing here on the far left, it's just to give you an example of how you can make something look with more depth. So I just grabbed a little bit more paint to make it more opaque. Thicker the paint, but more opaque. All right. So we said that this one is still not fully dry. And with this one, that I wanted to make the example really, really dark, I want to show how sometimes we can use other mediums to give different effects. So I have here two different colored pencils. One is white and this one is just dark umber. So if I put something darker on here, you can still see, oh, the tape is lifting a bit. So you can still see that you can give it more darkness, more depth. But sometimes that may not be what we want to do. All right, so if your paper, the image that you're working with, has a really dark background, you can use a white pencil. Over here, actually I'm going to do it on this one. You can also use the pencil to add depth or definition to a certain area. So let's say that you want to make here like there's a horizon there, right? And over here, we're still doing this. And you could always give even more depth or interest to the area with your colored pencils. If it is a lighter area, if you use the white pencil, it might not be, of course, as obvious as it is here. So that's why, depending on what situation you're trying to solve, is which of these solutions or which of these techniques you would like to try. Right, so I'm going to use this pencil. This is a yellow ochre. You can always layer the colors on top of watercolor. So this is a similar color, is not very different from what I'm using, and depending on the effect you may want to use, it would also be a good idea for you to try to do an exercise like this before you try it on your final piece, just in case you don't end up liking the result, and that way you don't have to redo all the work, right? So in this one I started creating my shape for those pebbles in white, and right now I decided that I wanted to cover part of it, and I'm mixing the brown and the ochre. It is important to remember that if you do decide to try this technique with colored pencils, for you to not to apply too much pressure as you're applying the color, because that might not allow more colors to mix in, right? And this is, like I said, just an example of how to do it. And just for fun, I'm just going to try some colors here that don't necessarily go with these like stone colors, just for you to see. Maybe you want to bring attention to something very, very bright. So this is a Parma Violet. This is how this would look. And violet and yellow are opposite colors in the color wheel. So that's why I decided to use these two, just to see how that contrast would look together. It might look terrible, it might not, I'm not sure. Or it might just make it look very different than what I had thought in my mind. And it might not be terrible or great, it might just be like different. So yeah, it doesn't look like there's high contrast there, so I've decided to put more depth here with my dark umber that I was using before. So to my taste, I do prefer the way that these original ones are looking. That violet is not doing much for my personal taste. Over here, so right now I'm trying to use this Posca pen, and this is a 7mm one. So I'm gonna give here. So for me, this looks a little bit too drastic, but maybe how I actually like how this is looking. This is looking for me a little bit too drastic, but it depends on what I would be, depending on like how it would look with the rest of the composition of whatever I'm working with, right? And of course you would put your highlight depending on where your light source is, or you can make an imaginary field and just do whatever you may feel like. And just to see how this looks, I'm putting a little highlight here with this white pencil that I have here. And it doesn't look great. I'm actually really liking how that looks. So this is a Prismacolor Premier White pencil. But there is another brand that I really do like their color pencil. I just don't have it here handy at the moment, which is fine. And then we have here a Tombow water-based pen. This is just gray. So just to see if this does anything. And it doesn't look like it's doing much, mainly because we're already working with very dark things. So if we keep adding darkness to it, nothing is going to look very muddled. So just to bring some light over here, how would this look? So we created depth here, adding an extra area. And over here I'm just writing, coloring a little bit with my white pencil. Just to see how that little bit of white is creating more contrast. Because when we have very similar colors or very opaque, what we're trying to do is something to pop out, right? And let's see how, just adding within that dark area, a little bit of that colored pencil. So it kind of shows here, but not so much here. So this is something that you may want to try or not. It's not mandatory. And of course, we could always try creating more depth with a dark marker. However, we do want to be mindful of how thick the line is that we're using, because darker lines may mean certain things. It might bring too much heaviness. So this micro pen is a number 08. Oh, there we go. Let's try something thinner. So this is way, way thin, way too thin. This is a 005. And this might bring us just a little bit of extra shadow, extra heaviness to add to that, for maybe here. So like I said before, you can try doing this on a separate piece of paper, not exactly on your final piece of work, just to give it a try and see which effect you prefer. So those are just a few examples of how to do some textures in different ways depending on background, on shape, adding different materials. And I have here a white pen from Faber-Castell, and we can try adding here. So you can't see it very well here because the background is not dark enough. But what if we do that here? I think it looks really nice here. And now it looks like there's smaller pieces of gravel in between the larger stones. And for like a cobbled street, that might look really nice. So there we are, 4 little examples. Let me know what you think of it.